Ma'am, step aside.
Ma'am, step aside.
I
I've
need the
shown you
generals.
to verify these credentials.
I've shown you my pilot's license, airline ID.
If you were standing in a crowded international airport and witnessed a black female pilot, fully dressed in her captain's uniform with 4 gold stripes on her sleeves, being stopped by the TSA in front of her teenage daughter for suspected forgery, what would you think? Would you think it was just a random check? A minor mistake that would be resolved in minutes? Because what happened next didn't disappear. It wasn't handled internally. And it didn't end at airport security. Within hours, the video of the detention went viral on social media. Weekly. It became a $4.8 million federal lawsuit, resulting in the firing of a TSA employee, forcing the U.S. government to admit its mistake, and triggering unprecedented changes to crew screening procedures. The woman detained that day was not a random passenger. She wasn't a self-proclaimed pilot. And she certainly wasn't an imposter. She was Captain Maya Reeves, 42 years old, with over 2 decades of commercial flight experience. An international captain for a major airline, who had piloted Boeing 777 seconds across oceans, storms, and emergencies most passengers never encountered. That day, Maya went to the airport not just to work. She went with a different purpose to teach her daughter that black women could stand at the top of the cockpit. But instead of a lesson in aspiration, her daughter witnessed something far colder, that sometimes, even 4 gold stripes and 20 years of dedication aren't enough to protect you from being seen as a suspect. And from that moment, a much bigger story began. Captain Maya Reeves wasn't born into a family with an aviation tradition. Nor did she grow up in suburban areas where children were encouraged to dream of the sky. She grew up in South Dallas, in a neighborhood where dreams were more realistic than survival. And being a pilot was never considered a career choice for black girls. Her father was a postal worker. Her mother was a night shift nurse. They taught Maya the value of discipline, perseverance, and doing her job well, but they never imagined their daughter would sit in the cockpit of the world's largest aircraft. Maya began dreaming of the sky at age 5, lying on a hot Texas lawn, watching a streak of white smoke cut across the blue sky. In that moment, she didn't know the name of the plane, didn't understand how jet engines worked, but she knew one thing: it was where she belonged. At Opsprezice. Maya joined the U.N.2 Welvis Air Force, choosing the most difficult path to becoming a pilot. She learned to fly in a harsh environment, where there was no room for doubt or emotion, only competence and discipline. By 22, Maya had military wings. She flew C-17 Globemasters, performing transport missions in combat zones, where a small mistake could cost lives. After 8 years in the military, while many chose a safer path, Maya chose a new challenge. She left the military and entered civilian aviation, a world supposedly more civilized, but full of invisible barriers. At TSA, she was recruited by a major airline. From then on, with each flight, each hour of accumulated experience, Maya quietly progressed, not through privilege or luck, but through precision and skill in the cockpit. 22 years later, Maya Reeves is more than just a pilot. She's the airline's go-to pilot for the longest, most challenging flights. And the one passengers trust will get them to their destination safely whether they know it or not. And this very woman, with her undeniable track record, is about to be questioned about whether she truly is a pilot. In Captain Maya Reeves' professional record, there's no mention of surprise stares, unnecessary questions, or moments that made her wonder if she was being judged for her competence or her race. But throughout her 22 years in the cockpit, Those things were always present. Passengers would look up when they heard her voice over the loudspeaker and whisper to each other. New flight attendants would mistake her for a ground support staff member. Gatekeepers would ask to check your paperwork, even though everything was in order. And sometimes, passengers would quietly request a change of flight, without giving a reason. But their eyes said it all. Maya never reacted aggressively. She learned to smile, explain, and move on, because she understood that each of her reactions represented not just herself, but all those like her in an industry still accustomed to the image of a middle-aged white male captain. She carried a burden no one had given her, yet one she couldn't put down, a burden that demanded perfection at all times. Always composure. Always the freedom to make mistakes. Maya had never told this to her 16-year-old daughter, Jasmine. She wanted her to grow up believing that the sky was open to everyone, that there was no need to learn to defend herself against prejudice. But 3 weeks before that day, on a quiet evening, Jasmine looked up from her desk and asked a seemingly simple question. "Mom, do you always have to be twice as good just to be recognized half as good?" That question stunned Maya, because it encapsulated 22 years of experience in a single sentence, and because if Jasmine had asked that, it meant she had begun to feel the same pressure. Maya understood that she couldn't avoid this conversation forever, and she made a decision not to tell her child about discrimination, but to show her the truth through her own life. That decision would take them to the airport the next morning and put them in a situation neither of them could have foreseen. After Jasmine's question, Maya didn't answer immediately. She understood that explanations wouldn't be enough. If her daughter had already begun to sense the pressure, the best way to deal with it was to show her mother the whole picture at work, no embellishment, no concealment. A few days later, Maya made a decision. She asked the airline for permission for Jasmine to accompany her for a full workday, not for tourism, but to observe from the cockpit. Everything was carefully arranged. Approval from the airline, FAA permission for the observer to sit in the jump seat, the agreement of the co-pilot and the flight crew, who immediately understood what Maya was trying to teach her daughter. The chosen flight was Flight 2847. Dallas, London Heathrow. A long, complex international flight. Truly the captain's domain. The departure time was afternoon, so Jasmine only needed half a day off from school. Maya wanted her daughter to see everything. The pre-flight check-in process, the decisions in the cockpit, and the feeling of being responsible for hundreds of lives. That morning, Maya arrived at DFW International Airport at 1030. She was fully dressed in her captain's uniform, a dark blue jacket with 4 yellow stripes on the sleeves, the wing insignia on her chest, and the familiar commander's hat. Jasmine walked beside her, her eyes sparkling, constantly asking questions. Maya answered each one, clearly feeling that her plan was working. Her daughter saw her not just as a mother, but as a true commander. 7:47 a.m. Mother and daughter proceeded to the security check area for flight crews in Terminal D. For Maya, this was a procedure so familiar it was almost unconscious. She had passed through this station hundreds of times. But that morning, she didn't know that in just a few seconds. Someone standing behind the check-in counter would see her and decide that something was not right. The man behind the security check counter that morning was TSA officer Derek Morrison. Senshi. He had only been with the TSA for 6 weeks, having failed his police academy training and been assigned to the crew screening area at Terminal D, considered less demanding, suitable for new recruits to familiarize themselves with the procedures. In his first 6 weeks, Derek had screened approximately 300 pilots and flight attendants. Almost all of them were the same, following a pattern his brain had built up. Men. White. Middle-aged. Always in a hurry. Speaking briefly. And walking straight through the screening area. The human brain is very good at recognizing patterns. And when something doesn't fit that pattern, the brain usually doesn't think my pattern is flawed, but rather that the person in front of it is problematic. Adzech patruzech shishaptea. M. Derek looked up and saw a scene he had never encountered before. A black woman in a captain's uniform walked slowly, accompanied by a teenage girl. The 4 gold stripes on Maya's sleeves didn't suggest command. They suggested something unusual. Maya placed the papers on the counter. Her voice calm and friendly. "Good morning. Captain Maya Reeves. Flight 2847 to London. This is my daughter. Jasmine. She has an observer permit." Derek took the papers. He looked at the photo, looked at the name, then looked back at Maya's face longer than necessary. "This says you're the captain." His voice wasn't one of verification, but of suspicion. Maya nodded. "Yes, I fly international flights on a Boeing 777 SP. In that moment, no insulting words were spoken, no raised voices. Only a subtle suspicion began to spread through the air, one that would quickly turn an ordinary morning into an inevitable confrontation. Maya was used to the delays. New employees usually check more carefully. Usually, it only takes a few dozen extra seconds and then it's over. But this time was different. Derek didn't return the documents immediately. He flipped through each card, checking the expiration date, comparing the photo, then looked up at Maya again as if waiting for some detail to contradict itself. From the next lane, a veteran TSA female spoke up. "Derek, that's Captain Reeves. She flies over here all the time. There's no problem." Another colleague nodded in confirmation. "Maya, long time no see. Is she your daughter?" The tension should have been eased there. But Derek didn't stop. In his mind, the colleague's confirmation wasn't proof, it was just subjectivity. He had been taught that familiar faces could lead to security errors. "I need further verification," Derek said, his voice still polite, but noticeably cold. "This is procedure." Maya noticed the change. It was no longer a routine check. It was distrust. "What specific verification do you need?" she asked. Her voice calm. "I have a briefing in 45 minutes. Derek didn't answer immediately. He took out his phone, turned his back, and called the airline's operations center. "This is the TSA at Terminal D. I have someone claiming to be Captain Maya Reeves on Flight 2847. Can you confirm?" The other end confirmed immediately. "Captain Reeves is on the crew list. She should be going through security right now." Derek frowned. "Is there a physical description?" A moment of silence passed on the other end. "We don't keep physical descriptions. We verify using codes and chips." When Derek hung up, instead of relief, his suspicions grew. In his mind, that meant anyone could read the names on the list and claim responsibility. He looked up, staring directly at Maya. "I need to make sure these papers aren't forged," he said slowly, "and that you're not impersonating a pilot." The word impersonating fell like a heavy weight in the crowded space. Jasmine squeezed her mother's hand. 3 pilots passing by stopped. One turned and shouted, "What are you saying? That's Captain Reeves. I flew with her." Derek stood still. Before him now was not just a woman with papers. It was a public situation where he had to choose between admitting he was wrong or continuing on the path he had started. And in that moment, he chose to continue. The atmosphere at the security checkpoint had completely changed. The passengers behind him began to slow down. Several crew members stepped aside to observe. Derek felt the gazes around him, and at the same time the pressure to prove he was right. He had openly expressed his suspicions. Withdrawing now would mean admitting that his initial suspicions were wrong. Maya looked directly at Derek, her voice low and firm. "You just called me an imposter. I have provided all the necessary documents, confirmed by colleagues, and verified by the airline. What more do you need?" Derek swallowed hard. In his mind, everything was jumbled: the procedure, his professional ego, and the image of the captain he knew. "Ma'am," he said, his voice stiffening, "I need you to come to the secondary security area for further verification." At that moment, things crossed the line from mere inconvenience. It was a detention. Jasmine clutched her mother's hand. "Mom, what's going on?" Maya took a deep breath. She understood that arguing now would only make things worse. But silence wasn't an option either. She leaned down and whispered to her daughter, "Jasmine, get your phone out. Record everything." Then Maya looked up and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "I am Captain Maya Reeves. I have been flying commercial flights for 22 years. I am being detained on suspicion of impersonation. Despite presenting all necessary documents and having confirmation from multiple TSA officers." Phones began to be raised. A veteran TSA officer stepped forward, his voice anxious. "Derek, you're making a serious mistake." "I'm just following procedure," Derek replied. But his voice had lost its initial certainty. "If anything goes wrong, I'll take responsibility." Maya looked him straight in the eye, her voice calm to the point of being cold. "You don't need to mention race. Just that you can't believe a black woman could be a captain is enough." That statement brought a moment of silence. Derek turned, gesturing for a colleague to lead the mother and child to the auxiliary inspection room, and in the moment the door closed behind them. Maya knew that this morning would no longer be a misunderstanding that could be quickly resolved. It had become an incident. The small, enclosed check room was illuminated by cold, white fluorescent lights. Maya sat upright in a plastic chair, her captain's uniform still neat, the 4 yellow stripes clearly visible under the light. Jasmine sat beside her, her hands trembling as she held her phone, still recording. Outside the door, Derek called 2 more TSA agents to act as witnesses. He began making the calls he should have made from the start. "Operations Center. I need to personally verify the identity of Captain Maya Reeves." On the other end of the line, the voice was beginning to lose patience. "We've already verified. She's the captain of Flight 2847. She's running late for the briefing." Derek frowned. "Can someone come down for a face-to-face identification?" "No. We verify using the system. Have you scanned the chip on her card?" A heavy silence followed. Derek hadn't scanned the chip. Meanwhile, outside the interrogation room, chaos was brewing. A veteran TSA officer called the Director of Federal Security at DFW Airport directly. "Sir, we have a serious problem. A new officer is holding Captain Maya Reeves, an international pilot. Many people have confirmed his identity, but he won't stop." Elsewhere in the airport, a pilot who had just witnessed the incident called the airline's chief pilot. "You need to know this immediately. Captain Reeves is being held by the TSA along with his daughter." That call was immediately transferred to the legal department. Inside the interrogation room, Jasmine whispered, her voice choked, "Mom, why won't they believe you?" Maya looked at her daughter, keeping her voice steady. "Because sometimes people believe the images in their heads more than the truth right before their eyes. But remember this, we don't stay silent. We record it, and we hold them accountable." After 25 minutes, the door opened. A man in a suit walked in Federal Security Director Robert Martinez. He looked at Maya for a few seconds, then froze. He recognized her. He had been a passenger on the flight Maya commanded 2 years ago. His face turned pale. "Captain Reeves," he said slowly. His voice tinged with anxiety. "I sincerely apologize. It appears a serious error has occurred." He turned to Derek. "Officer Morrison, what is the legal basis for detaining this person?" Derek stammered. "Verification of documents." "Sir." "Have you scanned the chip?" "No." "Sir." "Have you received confirmation from the airline?" "Yes." "Sir." "Has your colleague confirmed it?" "Yes." "Sir." The room fell silent. Martinez took a deep breath, then turned back to Maya. "Captain Reeves, your detention is unfounded. You are free to resume your duties immediately." Maya stood up. Her voice was calm, but cold. "Mr. Martinez, I appreciate your apology, but this cannot be handled internally. My daughter just witnessed her mother being treated like a criminal simply because someone couldn't imagine a black woman being a captain." She took Jasmine's hand and walked out of the room. Behind them, Director Martinez pulled out his phone and called TSA headquarters in Washington, D.C., because he knew very well this situation was beyond the airport's control. Just 20 minutes after Maya and Jasmine left the security check area, the first videos surfaced on social media. Not edited videos, not one-sided accounts. They were clear images, Maya standing upright in her captain's uniform. All paperwork presented. A colleague confirming, and a TSA agent still stubbornly refused to believe. Jasmine's video shot from a low angle, slightly shaky, with a choked voice behind the camera, became the focus. "Mom, why is this happening?" That question struck viewers directly. By 11:23 a.m. The first video had reached hundreds of thousands of views. An hour later, the number had surpassed 2 million. The hashtag number Justice for Captain Reeves spread across Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. The aviation community reacted almost immediately. The American Pilots Association issued a statement, holding a fully qualified captain, verified by colleagues and the airline, is unacceptable. Maya's airline publicly confirmed, "Captain Maya Reeves is one of our most experienced captains. We are providing full legal support." Women's organizations in aviation, civil rights groups, and the black community all spoke out. But what made the story transcend the aviation industry was the mother-daughter relationship. Thousands of comments repeated the same message. This is not just a woman under suspicion. This is a child learning how the world treats her mother. By Dwa Plays Dadded. M. The time Flight 2847 was scheduled to depart. Maya was no longer in the cockpit. She was sitting in the airline's legal office at the airport, with her lawyer, reviewing every frame, every word, every moment that had been recorded. The flight to London took off with a different captain. The 286 passengers were not given detailed information about the reason, but many of them had seen the video, and they understood. From that moment, this story was no longer about a TSA employee making a mistake. It had become a symbol of how even if you've proven yourself for 22 years, you can still be suspected simply for not looking like the image someone is familiar with. And when public attention is drawn, the system has no choice but to respond. 3 weeks after the incident at DFW Airport, a multi-hundred-page document was filed in federal court. Case title Reeves, Vive. Transportation Security Administration. This wasn't a sentimental complaint. It was a detailed indictment. Based on video, Witness testimony, internal procedures, and the TSA's own testimony. The lawsuit alleges 4 serious offenses: unlawful detention, discrimination based on race and gender, violation of the Fourth Amendment, and causing emotional distress to a minor who witnessed her mother being treated like a criminal. Maya's lawyer emphasized a key point: Captain Reeves provided all valid documentation, verified by the airline, vouched for by his TSA colleagues, and there was no reasonable basis for continued detention. The issue wasn't about security screening. The problem lay in refusing to accept the test results simply because the person standing in front didn't match the image the enforcement officer had in mind. The U.com RS government quickly realized they were at a disadvantage. The video was irrefutable. The witness testimony was uncontradictable, and the TSA officer's failure to scan the authentication chip was a clear procedural violation. During closed-door negotiations, government representatives understood that if the case went to public trial, it would not just be a losing lawsuit, it would be a national reputational disaster. 9 months later, the two sides reached a settlement agreement. No jury, no lengthy trial. Simeon. $8 million was paid to Captain Maya Reeves, part for unlawful detention and emotional distress, part as punishment, reflecting the TSA's systemic failure to prevent discrimination. And at the same time, another decision was made, quiet but decisive. Officer Derek Morrison was fired. His appeal was rejected. The reasons: failure to follow due diligence procedures, holding an employee without reasonable grounds, and applying a biased and suspicious standard. But for Maya, money and one person losing their job were never the end of the story. Because if the system doesn't change, it will happen to someone else. The $4.8 million settlement didn't just close a lawsuit. It triggered a chain reaction that the TSA couldn't control with a press release. Within 6 months of the incident, the TSA was forced to announce a series of mandatory nationwide reforms. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. All TSA employees, especially those working in the crew screening area, had to participate in mandatory training on unconscious bias. Not formal training sessions, but real-world scenarios, with Captain Maya Reeves's case included as an official case study. The crew verification process was revised. Any detention lasting longer than 10 minutes had to be under the direct supervision of a supervisor and documented in writing, clearly stating the specific circumstances. New TSA employees were no longer allowed to work independently immediately. They had to undergo 90 days of mentoring with veteran staff to prevent inexperience combined with professional ego from leading to risky decisions. And for the first time, the TSA began tracking retention data by gender and race to detect biased patterns, something they had previously avoided. Meanwhile, Maya Reeves made a decision that surprised many. She didn't withdraw from the public eye. She walked straight into the center of the dialogue. Maya founded the Reeves Foundation for Aviation Diversity, using part of the settlement money to provide flight training scholarships for young people of color and support research into aviation barriers. She appeared at aviation conferences, pilot training schools, and before congressional committees, speaking about something simple yet often overlooked. Process is only safe when it is applied fairly. 2 years after the incident, Maya received an unbelievable offer. The TSA invited her to speak at their annual training conference. The woman who had once been detained now stood before hundreds of TSA employees. Not to reprimand, but to point out the true consequences of decisions made in minutes. And what Maya said to them silenced the entire room. Standing before hundreds of TSA employees at that year's training conference, Captain Maya Reeves didn't talk about money. She didn't mention the lawsuit. And she didn't mention Officer Derek Morrison either. She only recounted a morning at the airport, where she was wearing her captain's uniform, holding her daughter's hand, and was suspected of being an imposter. Officer Morrison didn't think he was being discriminatory. Maya said he thought he was being careful, following proper procedures, protecting security. Then she paused, looking around the room. But his carefulness was selective. He saw a black woman with 4 yellow stripes. And instead of thinking, achievement, he thought suspicious. That's how bias works, not hatred. Just the wrong stereotypes in your head. Maya spoke about her daughter, about Jasmine's bewildered look as she asked, "Mom, why is this happening?" And about what a child learns in that moment, that even if her mother does everything right, the world can still treat her as a suspect. 4 gold stripes, Maya said slowly, are not armor. 22 years of service are not a shield. If your system only believes in the familiar image, then those who don't fit that image will always pay the price. She ended with a sentence that wasn't loud, but weighed heavily on her. Your job is to protect security, not to guard someone's dreams. 5 years after the incident, internal data showed a sharp drop in crew retention at TSA stations, and racial disparities had narrowed significantly. The reforms made a difference. Maya continued to fly, continued to mentor, and sometimes, Jasmine, now an aerospace engineering student, sits in the jump seat, watching her mother pilot the Boeing 777 across the ocean. That day at the airport, Maya wanted to teach her daughter that excellence can overcome doubt. Instead, she taught her a harder but more important, lesser lesson. That when prejudice arises, you take note, you stand firm, and you force the system to change. Captain Maya Reeves spent 22 years proving herself worthy of the 4 gold stripes. But it was that very moment of doubt that changed an entire system. And the question remaining for us is how many other people must be doubted before the image in our minds changes to reflect reality.